This is an ABC podcast.
Today we head to Tasmania, where clubs are relying on grey power to keep the local footy team alive.
Plenty of people out there with plenty of advice on what clubs and associations can do. It's never by people who are at clubs, it's always by people who don't turn up. They don't help, they're just full of opinions.
And while there's plenty of excitement in southeast Queensland over Brisbane's successful Olympic Games bid, the plan to host the Games had quite practical origins.
And we thought, well, how can we bring investment in transportation forward by a decade? And we thought, well, the best way to do that would be to have a bid for the Olympics and Paralympics to be staged in southeast Queensland.
I'm Sinead Mangan, and this is Australia Wide. Tasmania's hospitals have been described as being in crisis for years now and have some of the worst performance indicators in the country. But those in the sector are calling on the government to act on multiple reports that have been received recommending improvements to the health system. Meanwhile, thousands wait for change on an ever-growing elective surgery waiting list. Pia Wirzu has the story.
Oh, can you get the bowls down, please?
Kylie McLeod needs help with everything from getting a jar out of the cupboard to getting out of bed in the morning. She's already been waiting more than 5 years for shoulder surgery, and she's been told she could be waiting many more.
I mean, I know there's worse people out there than me. I mean, I feel for them, really I do. But, you know, deep down, I just want it done now. I mean, I can't work, and to do stuff around my home, it's horrible.
In the past decade, elective surgery waiting lists in Tasmania have blown out from 8,500 to 11,500. In that time, there have been 4 health restructures, at least 11 reports, and more than 200 recommendations for improvements to the health system. Tim Jacobson, State Secretary of the Health and Community Services Union, says it hasn't helped.
Staff are suffering, clearly reform fatigue, but secondly, the more we see things change, the more they stay the same. If you go back 20 years, most of the recommendations out of the Richardson report highlight issues that we're still grappling with, now some 20 years later.
As far back as 2014, a report highlighted that unacceptable numbers of overdue elective surgery were indicative of a failing health system. It recommended the development of a long-term elective surgery plan that didn't rely on one-off or annual funding, a sentiment echoed in another report 2 years ago that said this approach doesn't match with the priorities of medical clinicians. Despite this, the Tasmanian government has promised an additional $120 million for a blitz on elective surgery. Tim Jacobson again.
Really, we should have a government that has a significant degree of wisdom, can go back through all of the reports that have been written, most of which say, in essence, the same things.
The Tasmanian branch of the Australian Medical Association says the many reports highlight the lack of a clear long-term plan for health in Tasmania. Spokesperson Dr Annette Barrett says if that's going to happen, the politics needs to be taken out of health.
It's a big issue that's very important to the population, so therefore it's very tempting for political parties to use it as a political football. We at the AMA would very much like that to be stopped.
A Tasmanian government spokesperson says it's engaging frontline workers in planning and is committed to delivering long-term stability for the sector. They say their elective surgery blitz will enable more long-term planning. Kylie McLeod just wants solutions.
Something's just got to be done. I mean, the Liberals and the Labor, they're bickering about each other. Oh, the Labors didn't do this, the Liberals didn't do that. Well, stop it. Get on with it. Do something about it.
Launceston reporter Pia Wirzu with that story. Now we're going to stay in Tasmania, where football on the west coast of Tasmania, it's not what it used to be. Back in the day there were around 8 clubs and now they're just 2. One of those, Rosebery Toorak, is struggling to survive and is regularly beaten by hundreds of points. Like many clubs, the Hawks have a severe shortage of players. Northern Tasmania reporter Sean Wells went along to a game recently to see just how hard it is to keep this small club going.
It's a sunny day on Tasmania's rugged west coast and the fog is lifting over Rosebery's home ground, allowing the mountains in the background to just come into sight. It's a picturesque place for a game of footy, but it's been a hard and long season for these Rosebery Toorak Hawks.
Oh, yeah, the one at Sheffield, we got beat by nearly 500 points. That wasn't much fun. the boys that went out there, they struggled all day, kept committed all day, but Sheffield just had way too many players for us. We had 8 double up that day.
That's the club's president, Joe Sucic. The club has struggled with player numbers this year to such an extent that many have had to play 2 games a day. It's meant both the seniors and reserves have been getting flogged, often struggling to kick a goal.
People are getting older, younger blokes got other interests, motorbike riding and hunting and fishing and shooting, and also the casual workforce getting bigger and less permanent workforce. It's harder for people to, if they get injured, they can't work. And I think that's a real big factor.
Rosebery is a mining town, but the mine's workforce has been changing for years. The local mine is still operating, but the town isn't as big as it used to be, and it's meant a change in fortunes for the footy club. Marcus Goodson remembers the glory days here in Rosebery.
Early days we played, 96 grand final. Should have won that one too, but we didn't. But since then it's been growing. Then 98 and 99, played in 2000 grand finals. So had good 90s were good to us. So the last 6 years I think it's been going down. That's probably because of the mine. We'll blame them.
He isn't playing footy anymore, but is part of a core group of volunteers helping to keep the club alive.
Just stay involved in football. Got too old and got a knee replacement, so I couldn't play anymore. My best thing is to keep in touch and umpire. Love the mateship and love the club. So the only thing I can do, and drink alcohol too, so that helps.
On the field, the seniors are led by their inspirational playing coach, Duncan Murfitt. He's in his 50s and has played 450 games for the club and is also the club's secretary and treasurer.
There's lots of different stories. There's one bloke now that travels from Hobart each weekend. A few blokes that have never played football before and have taken up the game. A few blokes that have come out of retirement to help. And so, if we could get them all together on one day, we'd have a pretty good side.
He says while the results aren't going the club's way, the players want to see the club continue into the future.
We can't all be winners. There's only one side in any comp that can win a grand final. And so if your gauge of success is whether you're winning, that would tell you there's only one team that's successful every year. And that's not how I see it. And most of our players come off and pat each other on the back and, we did our best. And that's to me, that's winning in itself, or that's success for them. So just that knowing that they've done their best.
They'd rather lose by 60 goals than not have a club at all.
Nah, it'd be horrible if there was no football.
Christy Fellows has been volunteering in the canteen for 2 decades.
Flat out. Yeah, we pretty much, I was up till midnight last night and then back up here at 6 this morning to get everything ready. It's dwindled a little bit with numbers for footy and volunteers. Makes it pretty hard.
The club's trainer, Ray Masters, is 70 and only joined the club 3 years ago.
I'd rather come and help a club like this that's struggling, try and help them get up the ladder and go to a club that more or less got a made premiership, you know what I mean? You rub them down, you strap them, and the best part about it, they say thank you. That means a lot to me,
The club remains the heartbeat of this small town, and without it, Rosebery just wouldn't be the same. Its challenges are ones being felt right across the state and on the mainland too. Earlier this year, AFL Tasmania announced a review into the state of football at all levels, looking at how these smaller clubs can survive for years to come. The club president, Joe Sucic, says he won't let the club fold, but admits it's getting tougher and tougher to keep it going.
Hard decisions are going to have to be made by both clubs, associations and AFL Tas. And it all depends on players' numbers, Plenty of people out there with plenty of advice on what clubs and associations can do. It's never by people who are at clubs, it's always by people who don't turn up, they don't help, they're just full of opinions.
So true. Rosebery Track President Joe Sucic ending that story from Sean Wells.
You're listening to Australia Wide. On ABC Radio.
And you're with me, Sinead Mangan. To the southeast Queensland now, still buzzing from last week's announcement that Brisbane will host the rights to the 2032 Olympic Games. With the Tokyo Games underway and Aussies bringing in medals, hosting an Olympics might sound like an exciting prospect. But the Brisbane bid started with far more practical beginnings. It began with a meeting of mayors in 2014 who were brainstorming a way of bringing better road and transport infrastructure to their growing communities. They settled on an Olympic bid, and 7 years later, it's now locked in. Sunshine Coast Mayor Mark Jemison was in the room as that ball began rolling. He spoke to reporter Owen Jacques about the road to the 2032 Games.
The Council of Mayors, which represents the 10 major councils in southeast Queensland, recognised back as far as 2014 that we would have massive population growth pressures coming onto southeast Queensland. We were in the process of considering the next SEQ regional plan, and the forecast was that we would have 2 million more people joining us over the next 20 years. That's in addition to the 3.5 million that presently, at that time, made up the SEQ population. So 5.5 million people by 2041. And we recognised that there was one enormous deficit that our region had, and that was transportation. We had an antiquated railway system. We had an unusual mix of buses. We had obviously lots of people who still use their own car, but that was going to be the big issue for us. And we thought, well, how can we bring investment in transportation forward by a decade? And we thought, well, the best way to do that would be to have a bid for the Olympics and Paralympics to be staged in southeast Queensland.
Surely pitching for the Olympics must have seemed pretty harebrained at that moment.
Oh, look, I guess it was, and not all of the mayors necessarily agreed. I think they were generally all supportive of the general notion, but of course, mayors don't have a unilateral right to make any decision. You've ultimately got to get the support of your council. For a while, at least, not all of the councils were supportive, because you can't do these things on a shoestring. We had to have a budget, and we recognised that we were going to need $2 million, and we would need participating councils to fund that, to enable us to do the work. And look, there certainly were people who said, you guys are nuts. But, that's never been a deterrent for adventurous, confident people who believe in, their regions, who believe in what we're capable of as a nation. And you've only got to look at the success of the Melbourne Olympics in '56 and the Sydney Olympics in 2000 to see how great Australia can do these major events. Australia is great at doing these things.
I mean, what sort of reaction were you getting from state and federal counterparts? I mean, were they sort of saying, we're interested in this, go for it? Or was it being treated a bit more like this is a bit of a wacky scheme and we can't really see how it'll unfold?
Local government, in some ways, is much maligned at a state and federal level because they think they're much more superior to local government. But unless local government's got a shoulder to the wheel, nothing happens. Federal governments couldn't do this. The state government, without the support of councils, couldn't have done it. I mean, the Premier wasn't a supporter to start with. That's on the public record. We had great confidence in what we were doing, and we knew that ultimately, if we didn't undertake this piece of work, then what were our chances of getting that infrastructure investment? I mean, at the end of the day, we're still reliant on the state and federal governments around delivering that infrastructure. And I, for one, will be seeking to ensure they're not allowed to take any shortcuts, because that would undermine the whole exercise. If we've still got an 1890s railway line from Beerburrum to Nambour come 2032, then we will have failed.
Sunshine Coast Mayor Mark Jemison on the humble beginnings of the now successful Brisbane Olympic bid, which was a plan to improve transport infrastructure for South East Queensland. And he was speaking there to Owen Jacques.
You're listening to Australia Wide on ABC Radio.
Now let's head to Wagga Wagga in New South Wales to meet local high school student Fatima Abessi. She and her family arrived in Australia from Afghanistan via Iran as refugees 4 years ago. She spoke to our reporter Manaz Angouri.
My name is Fatima Abbasi and I'm in Year 9 at Mount Hassan High School. I was born in Iran and I lived there for 12 years. Then I came to Australia and it's been 4 years.
Fatima's family moved to Iran from Afghanistan before she was born. They're part of Afghanistan's Hazara community, an ethnic minority that faced persecution and discrimination for decades. Hazaras weren't always the minority in Afghanistan, but after years of targeted and systematic attacks against the group, it's now become the reality. Earlier this year, a girls' high school in a predominantly Hazara neighbourhood was targeted in a bombing, killing 85 people and injuring countless others, mostly girls aged between 11 and 17.
When I heard the news, I felt very, very upset that most girls were the same age as me, and I'm having education here while they're really struggling to get little education. When I see other girls in Afghanistan who don't have opportunity at all, it makes me sad and upset and makes me motivated to achieve more.
Ongoing attacks have forced many Hazaras to migrate to neighbouring countries like Iran. But Fatima says while she was born in Iran, being from Afghanistan meant the discrimination didn't end across the border.
In Iran, I was limited to education as a refugee, especially as a young female student. I think I had many hardships. I was limited to participate in educational competitions or any events because I was a refugee. Other students had to point out that I was a refugee.
After spending the first 12 years of her life in Iran, Fatima and her family sought refuge in Australia. They were given humanitarian visas and settled in Wagga Wagga in 2017.
Life as a student in Iran makes me value my education in Australia more. I see the opportunities that I have in Australia as a miracle because I didn't have those access to in Iran.
Fatima's mother Razia, who never had access to schooling herself, says education is valued greatly in their family.
During those times when I was young, girls didn't go to school, but education is very important in our family. We encourage our children to study hard. It's very difficult in Afghanistan for them to do that. All these girls wouldn't be able to go to school there. Almost 200 girl students were killed or injured or lost in that attack. They wouldn't have been able to study in Afghanistan. We're very happy here, thank God. We're happy with our children by our side. But families and relatives continue to be killed back home. We're very worried about them. We can barely sleep at night.
After continuously excelling in her schooling, Fatima became one of only 2 students in Wagga Wagga to be awarded the Harding Miller Education Scholarship, which aims to support girls from disadvantaged backgrounds.
This scholarship is a great opportunity that they help you to achieve what you want. So there is always a support for you and it provides tools, resources and support that you need to get into university.
I was very happy that my daughter got that scholarship. My dream coming here was that my children are able to study. My children are happy. Our time has passed. It's all about the kids. Even when we were refugees in Iran, I wasn't thinking about myself, that I should wear nice clothes or a nice scarf. I was thinking about the children. Day and night, I was thinking about them.
As a child of immigrant parent, I realized that the only way I can help my parents is to get the most out of my education. I want to go to university and maybe I want to become a lawyer because when I was a kid, I always wanted like superpowers to make a difference in world. But as I mature up, I realized that I want to become a lawyer to fight for what I think is right.
Extraordinary young woman. That's Year 9 Wagga Wagga student Fatima Abbasi.
This is ABC Australia Wide.
When a loved one passes away, it can be difficult to express your own grief, never mind talking about it with your children. A book written about the loss of a terminally ill child in a small mining town in WA's outback looks to provide some answers for you. Kalgoorlie reporter Danushi Diaz has this story.
Young Jackson Crowley is sending a birthday invite to one of his friends. The invite is tied to bright red balloons aimed at the clouds, where his friend Harry Horan may be right now.
It's working! It's gone straight up, mate.
Harry passed away from cancer in 2019. The 8-year-old's death left his family and the small Goldfields town of Campbelda devastated. For his parents Beck and Lee and their daughter Ava, life will never be the same again.
It's just one day at a time. Sometimes it's an hour at a time, sometimes it's a minute at a time. The grief can hit you when you least expect it. You think that you're going along okay, and then you might hear a song or see something, and then it just knocks you for six again. And I don't think it'll ever change. But we have to go on for Ava.
You know, you've got to look after each other, support each other when you're not doing so well, and talk to your wife and your children and try and keep moving.
In this immense grief, there's been one small piece of comfort for Harry's loved ones. A book titled Where Are You, Harry? Helps understand death from a child's perspective.
Where did you go, Harry? Where did you go? Did you fly across Australia to where the sand meets the sea? Did you swim in the ocean where the fish swim?
After reading the book, Harry's friends feel very close to him.
It taught me that Harry's always around us.
How often do you talk to Harry now?
Every night.
What do you talk about?
Can't tell.
And for Harry's friend Molly Way, she says she can even hear him every now and again.
It teaches me Harry's up above us, and when it's stormy, he's turning on his motorbike.
The book was written and illustrated by teacher's aide Sunny Ling, whose brief encounter with Harry became the inspiration for a piece of work to help many children in grief.
Just walking down the path to the classroom that I was going into, another classroom, to support another student, and he stopped to look at me and he said, "Good morning, Miss Sunny." I just thought it was the sweetest thing, because most kids are quite busy when they're on their little mission. He was kind of skipping, and I just remember thinking, what a beautiful boy. A few months later, someone said that he had relapsed. It was just such a terribly sad time for Campbelda and for Harry's family. The morning before Harry's funeral, I put a bit of thought into Jackson attending the funeral, and Jackson to me represented all of the children at that stage. I knew that I had to write something.
Did you need to take your shoes off? Are there prickles where you go? Do you take your toothbrush for that smile that we all know?
Miss Sunny says the book is helping kids cope with death through imagination.
Children love simplicity, so we've kept the book relatable for children. From my experience in the classroom, I've painted the classroom scene that children would easily recognise, so it would help with conversation. There's an urgency in my words to try and convey that shock that you initially face when someone is taken.
Harry's family is grateful for the impact the book is making.
I think it's written in a way that kids will understand it, and they'll get something out of it, and they'll have a little bit of an idea of where people may possibly go or what they're doing.
Yeah, they're not physically here, but they're still just here in spirit. Harry's still around.
You know, as time passes, we almost feel that we're getting further away from him. This sort of brings him back again, or brings him closer.
As grieving parents, our worst fear is that Harry will be forgotten. So if people are reading his story and seeing his face in the book, then that brings us a little bit of peace.
Where are you, Harry? Where did you go? That's right. In my heart, I'll imagine you in everything.
Sometimes children are our biggest teachers. So sitting with a child and listening to them break down the possibilities could be quite healing. No one has any answers. We can turn to religion, we can retreat, we can shut the world out. But my approach to grief is to wonder where our loved ones have gone, to honour who they are and who they were in our lives, to think that it's not final.
Just beautiful. That was Cambalda Teacher's Aide, Sonny Ling, ending that story from Danushi Diaz in Kalgoorlie. And that's all from the Australia-wide team for today. I'm Sinead Mangan. I hope you have a lovely evening. Cheerio.
You've been listening to an ABC podcast. Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.